I wasn't supposed to be home for another week. The train's brakes squealed against the tracks as I stepped onto the platform, a sharp wind slicing through my tailored coat. It was the kind of early autumn chill that makes the world feel brittle, like one careless move could shatter it. My phone buzzed for the third time that morning. I ignored it again. The city skyline behind me glowed copper in the lowering sun, but my mind was already down the quiet suburban street where I grew up. I told my parents I'd be stuck at the marketing summit in Chicago until Friday. A harmless, white lie. But the conference ended early, and I craved the comfort of my old bedroom, the one place that had always felt like mine. The gravel driveway crunched under my heels as I approached our faded blue Colonial. The curtains in the living room twitched. A low hum drifted out of the half-open front door, my mother's voice, brisk and determined. Then I heard the thud of a box dropping to the hardwood floor. Another, and another. I froze. My heart skipped, then pounded with a hot rush of confusion. Through the crack in the door, I caught a glimpse of my mother folding my favorite quilt. My father sealed a cardboard box with a strip of packing tape. My boxes. A sour knot tightened in my throat as their words floated out. This will make it easier for her to move into that tiny studio. Tiny studio? The air felt suddenly too thin. I can still taste the metallic fear of that night, the one that finally cracked the fragile truce between my parents and me. I was 22, fresh out of college with a marketing degree and more ambition than they thought was reasonable for a girl. My mother's voice, usually clipped and precise, trembled as she paced the kitchen. "Natalie," she said, because my name has always been stretched into 3 sharp syllables when she's angry. "This city apartment fantasy is reckless. You don't need to prove anything to anyone." My father didn't pace. He just leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his silence heavier than any lecture. The overhead light buzzed, flickering like it wanted to run from the tension too. I try to keep my own voice steady. "It's not a fantasy. I've saved enough. I already have a job offer. It's what I want." Mom spun toward me, her silk scarf unraveling from her shoulders. "We've done everything to keep you safe. And this is how you repay us? Running off to what? Be some advertising hotshot in a city full of strangers." Her words stung more than I expected. I gripped the back of the kitchen chair, my knuckles white. "You didn't raise me to hide behind someone else's comfort. You raised me to think for myself." Dad finally spoke, low and measured. "We just don't want to watch you fail." That single word, fail, lodged in my chest. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat burn. Maybe failure is mine to experience. The silence that followed was worse than the argument. My mother turned away, dabbing her eyes with the corner of her scarf. My father looked at the floor. I left that night, heart hammering. But before I reached the door, my grandmother, who had been quietly knitting in the living room, rose and pressed something into my hand, a tiny brass key on a worn leather cord. "It belonged to your grandfather," she whispered. "He carried it when he started his first business. A reminder that doors will open for those who believe they can unlock them." Her wrinkled hand squeezed mine once, firm and knowing. I stepped into the cool night air, the key warm against my palm, a small weight of hope and defiance. That was the moment I decided. Whatever door awaited me, I would be the one to turn the key. I landed in New York with 2 suitcases, and the kind of trembling hope that keeps you upright when every other part of you wants to collapse. The city smelled of roasted chestnuts and rain-soaked pavement. It felt like possibility and danger rolled into one. At first, I rented a tiny room in a brownstone in Brooklyn, barely wide enough for a single bed and a desk salvaged from the curb. Each night, I wrote until the blue hours of dawn. My old laptop hummed like it, too, was willing me forward. I'd picked up freelance design gigs, logos for neighborhood bakeries, wedding invitations for strangers on the internet, anything to keep the lights on. Some nights, when exhaustion pressed against me like a weight, I would run my thumb over the small silver locket my grandmother had given me before she passed. Inside was a picture of her younger self, smiling with a confidence I was only beginning to understand. Her whispered words still rang in my head. "Build something that can't be taken from you." It wasn't glamorous. I worked at a coffee shop during the day, steamed milk until my hands were red and raw, and spent the nights chasing deadlines. I kept a tiny corkboard above my desk pinned with every check I earned, each one a victory, proof that I was creating something of my own. A turning point came when I met Laura Mitchell, a seasoned creative director known in the industry for her sharp eye and even sharper wit. She ordered a latte one bleary morning while I was behind the counter. She noticed the sketches I'd left on the side of the register. My designs for a fictional boutique. "These are yours," she asked, lifting one with the gentlest care, as if it were something fragile. I nodded, suddenly aware of the milk foam streaked across my sleeve. "They're good. Send me your portfolio," she said, sliding a business card across the counter like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, I emailed her with a trembling hand. Within a week, she invited me to assist on a campaign for a luxury fashion house. From there, the climb was grueling but electric. Laura became both mentor and quiet champion. She taught me how to negotiate contracts without apologizing, how to trust the gut instinct that whispered before the numbers made sense. There were setbacks, clients who doubted me because of my age, men in meetings who looked past me as if my ideas were decorative, but I learned to stand taller, to let my work speak first and my voice cut through second. Years passed. My name began appearing in glossy magazines and on the credits of high-profile campaigns. I founded Harbor and Pine, my own design studio tucked in a sunlit loft downtown. The city's skyline glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, each skyscraper a silent witness to the nights I'd almost given up. Through it all, I kept my success quiet from my parents. My social media showed coffee cups and blurred sunsets, never the high-rise office or the six-figure contracts. They still picture me as the girl who'd once wept in the hallway with a duffel bag, and I let them. Because someday, though I didn't yet know when, the truth would need to land like a thunderclap. I heard the deadbolt click before I even reached the door. My heels sank slightly into the thick cream carpet of my penthouse entryway, a small detail I'd chosen deliberately to muffle the sound of arrivals. When the door finally opened, my mother's voice floated in first, brisk and commanding as always. "Savannah, I told you she wasn't ready for a real apartment. A studio is exactly what she can manage. Maybe then she'll finally understand how life works." I stepped into the doorway before they could take another breath. "Interesting plan, Mom," I said, letting the handle rest in my palm like a gavel. "But you're standing in my apartment." The scene froze. My father's hand, still clutching a folded packing box, stilled midair. My mother's fingers tightened around the plastic grocery bag stuffed with what looked like my old college sweatshirts. My little brother Mason peeked around them, eyes wide as if he'd wandered onto the wrong movie set. The late afternoon light spilled through the wall of windows behind me, streaking gold across the white oak floors and the massive abstract canvas I'd commissioned last spring. Beyond the glass, the Hudson shimmered like a restless ribbon of mercury. I let them look. That was the plan, no words at first. Just the silent proof of everything they'd once called impossible. The floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with art books and first editions, the curved ivory sofa draped with a cashmere throw, the gleaming kitchen island where a vase of fresh lilies perfumed the air. My mother blinked hard, her carefully drawn brows climbing toward her hairline. "Whose place is this?" she managed, her voice sharp but unsteady. "Mine," I said, slipping off my blazer and hanging it on the brass hook by the door. Every square foot, every painting, every lily in that vase. Dad cleared his throat, the sound dry and uncertain. "Savannah, what is this?" I crossed to the marble island and poured sparkling water into a crystal glass, letting the bubbles hiss before I spoke. "Remember when you told me a woman like me couldn't survive in New York without marrying well? When you said my degree was a hobby and that I'd come crawling home?" Mom's mouth tightened. "We were trying to protect you from disappointment. By packing my things without asking?" I tilted my head, the chill in my voice cutting through the fragrant air. "That's not protection. That's control." Mason shifted uncomfortably, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. This is wow." I offered him a small smile.
Yeah. Wow.
I set the glass down gently. Since you left me no choice, here's the truth you've never bothered to ask about. I own this penthouse. I built my design studio from a single freelance contract to a national brand in under 3 years. Last quarter, we closed a partnership with one of the biggest luxury retailers in the country. Dad blinked. You what? My net worth, I continued, my voice steady, just crossed 7 figures. And before you worry, no, I didn't marry rich. I worked hard.
Nights.
Weekends. I said no when everyone told me to settle. Silence stretched like a taut wire. My mother's face flickered, shock, pride, something she wasn't ready to name. Finally, she whispered, Savannah, we didn't know. That's the point, I said softly. You never asked. The lily scent deepened as the sun slid lower, painting the river in molten copper. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, slow and certain. Dad set the box down, his shoulders sagging under the weight of unspoken years. Mom's eyes glistened, though she blinked quickly, fighting the evidence. Mason just grinned, a little awed, a little relieved. I let the silence linger a moment longer. Every inch of this space, the art, the light, the quiet power, speaking for me before I would. I leaned back in the leather chair, the faint creak echoing like a slow exhale of power. The late afternoon light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting long, honey-gold streaks across the polished oak of my desk. My parents sat across from me, Dad stiff and red-faced, Mom's hands nervously smoothing the fabric of her floral skirt. For the first time in my life, it wasn't me fidgeting. I laced my fingers together, resting my elbows on the desk. So, I said, letting the word hang like a test. We need to talk about what happens next. Mom blinked rapidly. Charlotte, I'm not here to humiliate you, I interrupted gently. But we're going to set a few new rules. Dad's jaw tightened. Rules. Yes. I held his gaze. Because for years, the only rules we followed were yours. Silence settled. Beyond the glass, the city shimmered in the last wash of sunlight. Somewhere below, a taxi horn bleated, distant and unimportant. I took a slow breath. First, Mom, Dad, you're going to downsize. Not because you can't afford the house, but because it's swallowing you whole. The constant upkeep, the empty rooms, it's keeping you trapped in memories you refuse to release. I'll help with the logistics if you want. But you too need a space that feels like yours, not a monument to a life that's already changed. Mom pressed her lips together, eyes glistening. She gave a tiny nod. Second, I said, turning to Dad, you need to let go of the idea that my life has to fit into your plan. I know you meant well when you thought you were helping me by packing my things. But control is not care. From now on, you respect my choices, even if you don't understand them. Especially if you don't. His mouth opened, then closed again. The flush in his cheeks softened to something almost like shame. Third, I continued, my voice steady. I'll support you financially, emotionally, if you both pursue something that brings you joy. Not just routine. Not just survival. Mom, you used to paint. Dad, you always wanted to restore that old sailboat. Do it. No more hiding behind the excuse of being too old or too busy. Mom's tears spilled over. Dad stared down at his hands, his broad shoulders sinking. I softened my tone, leaning forward. This isn't punishment. It's a reset. For all of us. A long, quiet moment passed. The room smelled faintly of cedar and the vanilla candle I'd lit earlier, a calm contrast to the storm of our history. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. You've built something incredible, he said, voice rough. His words faltered. I'm proud of you, Charlotte. Something in my chest loosened, a knot untying after years of silent tension. I smiled, small but real. Thank you. That means more than you know. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle awake, as if the skyline itself approved of this fragile truce. I stood on the wraparound balcony of my loft, the city glowing beneath a thin veil of mist. The skyline shimmered with evening lights, each one like a tiny heartbeat. Behind me, the quiet hum of conversation drifted from the living room, my parents and my younger brother laughing softly over mugs of tea. It wasn't the strained, brittle laughter I remembered from years ago. It was lighter, tentative but real. The conditions I'd set earlier were simple but non-negotiable. My father would finally downsize his business and spend weekends volunteering at the animal shelter he always claimed he never had time for. My mother would take the art classes she'd secretly dreamed of for decades. My brother, well, he had agreed to therapy to untangle his own resentments. At first, their eyes had widened in shock. But now, a few weeks later, the edges of their resistance were softening. I brushed a curl behind my ear and tightened the old silver bracelet around my wrist. The one Aunt Lorraine had slipped into my palm the night I first left home. "This is for when you forget what you're worth," she had whispered. I hadn't forgotten, but I liked the reminder. A breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked pavement and freshly brewed coffee from the cafe below. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. For so long, I had equated strength with distance, with shutting doors and never looking back. But tonight, I understood that real strength could also mean letting people in carefully on your own terms. When I turned to look inside, my mother caught my eye. She smiled, tentative, hopeful. And for the first time in years, I smiled back without that familiar ache in my chest. I stepped inside, the bracelet cool against my skin, the city lights at my back. My voice was calm, certain, almost like the steady heartbeat of the skyline itself. "I'm finally home," I said, the words warm and unshakable. But this time, it's on my own terms. And just like that, the weight I'd carried for so long slipped quietly into the night.